My house of my parents were near the square, so let's say it's part of my life, it's part of my history, as it is for all the inhabitants of the city. Our history is passed always through that square for many, many historical events. For example, manifestation, even for good events, for celebrations or different things.
Before the fall of the regime, basically it was a square of big gestures. There was a total lack of intimacy. People were not a multitude of individuals, but it was like a crowd which was brought there or asked to leave the square and brought back in. During the periods of the transition, it became like a roundabout where just all the traffic would go and would be the shortest cut from one part of the city to the other.
The square was, let's say, not anymore in the attention of nobody because we had the attention to reconstruct the country.
And there was no real public life unless it was moments of demonstration or protest.
Change that again has brought so much oxygen to the city center, literally but also mentally. The brief of the competition was a very symbolic one, asking to reclaim the square as a public space and no longer as a traffic space. We immediately started developing the project in an intense period of 1 or 2 years, but then the project was abruptly stopped and was on hold for 5 years. And we restarted after these 5 years. And we also changed the method or the approach to how to develop the project to involve many more people in the process of developing the square.
It was like a chamber music orchestra where you have different voices without a conductor, which is the point of the chamber music.
So it has been a conversation first between us, 51, and Anri Sala, and gradually this conversation has become bigger and bigger. And at the end, I think the success of the project is in the fact that this conversation has become an urban conversation. We have activated institutions that are having their property around the square.
One of the things that it was very important from the very beginning was the idea of the scale. It inherited all these problems from post-communist society, where the scale, the relation between the individual and everything that represents the history, the state, it's a bit out of scale. But for us, it was a pity to reduce the public space in order to resolve the problem of scale.
The square was a very authoritarian space, very monumental, representing power.
It was like a book that you'd read the first page and you'd already know how it ends, because you could see it from very far away and you'd know what it was happening, which is also about this idea of dictatorship, that you can see from everywhere and you can control space. Intimacy is not something that this square had, and it's not known to be part of the public spaces in dictatorships. So how to keep the surface and yet produce intimacy? And this is from where all the ideas started.
The value that we found in the square was the huge openness it had, because we feel that this large scale actually in the city center of Tirana has a big potential, because the city is so congested, so crowded, that suddenly in the center to find openness, that's the kind of decision we took from the very beginning. But we didn't want this openness to be intimidating, and so we made a belt around the openness, a belt of trees, of shadow, of diversity, of different ways of using the space. And this belt around the square somehow hides the center, becomes also intimate.
Also an acoustic foam around it. So you are at the very heart of the city, and this is the point from where you have the biggest distance from the city.
And this openness is made through this very wide, flat pyramid, which is absolutely empty.
Your body feels it, and then your eye can capture it. The moment that you go at the very top of the pyramid, where everyone can go, the relation between you and the buildings around is already been altered, has already been reduced. You are not anymore looking up at those buildings, but you are in a more equal level. The way how it relates to the water, when the water is programmed to go on certain parts of the pyramid, use the slope, use the nature of the pyramid as a way to go down, like a film of transparency, but which also reflects the buildings around.
The water is, I think, a way how to make this radical setup like human and intimate, but also it's an element to play with. Some people go around the water, other people just walk through. Some people think it's just sewage leaking. Other people think it's like an artificial lake. So this element of water produces, for us, an infinity of different imaginations. And that brings a very playful and also maybe poetic element to the square. What it does physically is that it changes the perception of the stones. Suddenly they seem like polished.
They have a tendency to merge into each other when they are dry. So the water brings contrast and also brings more this sense of differentiation among the stones, which is also a very nice metaphor, I believe, thinking of Albania and of us. In a manner of speaking, it brings the whole country geologically into its very heart.
Very quickly, when we presented the project, we found out that this Italian garden had a kind of personal meaning to every citizen in Tirana.
When we were small children, our parents brought us there and make photos. And then we brought our children there and made photos, and they go there with their children now and make photos, and it is another symbolic of the city. I don't go anymore there, but I like to look at it.
Which was an extra reason to keep it and to integrate this historical shape into the new plan. One thing which is very important, I think, that the square does is that it revalues a quality that Albanian society has, and that's a kind of Mediterranean quality of living together, like sharing public space, enjoying it together. The Skanderbeg Square project shows it as a noble activity and an activity of pride and an activity of love, you could say. So to somehow be together in public space.
Things that had completely disappeared from that public space because it was a roundabout for cars.
What is specific about this chair indeed is that it's movable, which basically transforms the public space into a place that says and communicates like, okay, you're welcome here, you can choose your own spot. The thing that we added is the specific size of it, or you can sit like a king, very alone and very generous, but you can also sit with two people together, and then you suddenly have to sit very close, and you see how people relate to each other. The chair somehow reveals it in a very charming way. Apart from the chair, there's also many other ways of sitting. You also have benches which are more fixed and which are more making collective configurations. And even another scale is that we reworked the stairs of every building to become much more of a resting spot. Like in the tradition of the good Italian public space, the Renaissance, you have these stairs which are not just to go in and out, but also to stay. And this huge variety of places to sit makes the square, I think, so rich in experience, even if it's in its layout looks very simple.
And because Tirana has not so many so good spaces to stay, and this is the main one we have.
Yeah, the square is obviously a physical space, but in this physicality, in this real experience, there's a lot of symbolic value. If you experience it every day, it also becomes part of your mental map. And in that sense, it's also a very political project to make a square like this, a square for an open society, you could call it.
I think that now the square gives the idea of a modern era, of the modern time, of hope. This renovation is also an expression of our renovation of the country. We went out of the dark. I think that we are yet in an experimental moment to find a way how the square will be useful in a very decisive way.
So how to make a square that resembles to that process, who does not bring answers, but somehow frames better the questions. It's like a huge operation at the heart of the city. So in a way, it's also, to some extent, an operation in the heart of the people. During the construction, the time it took, the fact that it was interrupted, that it was relaunched, and then it was... So, of course, it produced also a lot of frustration. I think now also the people who need to drive are very happy that the square exists, because at the end of the day, life is not about going the fastest way from A to B, but it's about what happens between A and B.